conversation here in studio. And gentlemen, I'd like to just pick up from, the U.S. Press Secretary coming out to congratulate President Uhuru Kenyatta on his re-election. And, something that they've pointed out is that they applaud the observers, the international observers who were in the country and sort of like gave this election a clean bill of health. But just going back to a few days after the, Kenyans went to the poll, and Senator James Orengo actually said that we should be able to actually, scrutinize just who these election observers are. That's what he said just maybe a day or two after the election. Does that hold any water? Nelson, I had not heard from you for some time now. Maybe if I can just hear from you about the role of election observers and them giving the whole election a clean bill of health.
I think at the point in time when we left the discussion, we'd summarized that the role of the observers were almost very perfunctory. In fact, if you were to interrogate what they were doing, most of them were just playing on their phones and the iPads. John Kerry, when he was asked to indicate what really did he observe, he said, I observed that child being used to jump the queue thrice. You can imagine that is what comes from John Kerry. But anyway, let me emphasize what Senator James Orengo said. Senator James Orengo said that he does not have any faith in any observer led by those three individuals, the former president of Ghana, John Kerry, and Thabo Mbeki. Look, what is the history of John Kerry? John Kerry is associated with the Carter Foundation. During the late 70s and the early 80s, Carter and his foundation were involved in so many subversive activities to destroy nascent democracies in developing countries. And look, these are the individuals who started the uprising in Algeria. They took it to Libya. They took it to Egypt. They took it to Syria. You know, I do not see any credibility in what may come out of any oversight by John Kerry. That is my personal view, which tends to resonate with the view of many people who have historical knowledge as regards what the Carter Foundation does. Now, what about Thabo Mbeki? Thabo Mbeki was forced to resign because he had, so to speak, been impeached by ANC. He's somebody with very little credibility when it comes to African statesmen. And I think to that extent, much emphasis should not be based upon these so-called reports by the observers. The observers were very reluctant to accede to a request by a very key player in this election to interrogate the systems upon which these results were being collected and transmitted. And I think to that extent, we need to run away from this culture where when one is bereaved, you run to your normal business saying, okay, it's done, without really interrogating what was the source of the bereavement. I think that is what the international community have demonstrated. They're least concerned to see how we fare on after our bereavement. I think the burial is more important to them than how we fare on.
Interesting. Mutai, just coming to your comment, and just before I forward my question to you, just some pictures from Treasury. And remember, like I mentioned, the devolution, CS Mwangi Kiunjuri, today is going to be briefing the media on the preparations for the assumption of office of the governors. As you can see, the journalists, the mics are already there. We'll be getting to cross over there and just listen in. I can see quite a number of some activity there. And he's going to be briefing the media on the assumption of office of governors. So we'll be bringing that live to you here on Kivumbi 2017. Mutai, just coming on the same backdrop, talking about observers. And Felix, when we started, had brought in quite an interesting view in regards to this, that their work normally, they come to the country just maybe 2 or 3 days before the election. Their work starts at 6 a.m. when the polling stations open. And after that, just maybe a day later, they come out and give their reports. Whatever they put out as their report, should it be a fair judgment of how the whole electoral process was, considering that, they observed and assessed and analyzed just maybe a day or two of the election, but there's so much more. Actually, the most critical part of the election is what happens after voting day.
I think we should not lose focus when we talk about election observing. I had the privilege of being an observer myself. And election observers, as Felix will tell you, they are not people who are just put up together and told, go and observe an election. There is a training, and there is a lot that goes into observing. Although I love my personal views on what should be done, one, we should increase the scope. With the technological era, we should now move away from just observing to even at times interrogating these systems. I think that one was lacking. But by and large, and the historical views of the heads of these observer groups, but besides us, we need to respect institutions. AU is a serious institution. The Carter Foundation, although Senior Harvey has some serious reservations, it is an institution which it has been there for some time. And when they give their observations, and they say they were preliminary, they were not the final reports. So we should not be too harsh on them. And again, we should not be seen to heading towards maligning institutions when we cannot achieve certain targets. We should stand and be firm on some of these things. Another example is Ghana is now I think the epitome of democracy, electioneering in this part of the region. And when we have people like Mahama and with what their efforts in observing, I think it doesn't augur well with some of us. The election might have had issues, but the observer missions, and they raised them. If you read the report by the EU, you will see certain issues that were raised by those three guys who are reading the report.
But the bigger conversation and the bigger message, even in the press briefings that they had, is that the process, they gave it a tick. They said it was a clean process. Karanja, you seemingly are disagreeing with the thoughts here.
You see, I think let's be honest with each other. First and foremost, the technical backup of the observer leader is not just a one-person thing. They have a battery of people who even came months before. And those people, they are not just here to give clean bill of health for the sake of it. No, they have gone deep into it. But even more importantly is that we shouldn't castigate the observers after the event. What should have happened by those who were claiming that there was either bias or they didn't do their job is that way before the accreditation or after they have been accredited, then you should raise the issue and say, from my perspective, I don't believe we are going to get a credible report from this observer group. But after they have given the report, then you start saying, oh, there are these, and that. That is crying after the event. And I think Kenyans should be able to understand that these observers, they have standards. Not only do they have standards, they have credibility, personal credibility.
All right.
Themselves. So they are not just coming here and giving a clean bill of health to
for
please
the sake of it.
either party or whatever. In any event, first of all, they didn't come here as parties to either NASA or Jubilee or even the IBC.
Okay.
They came here. The only thing that happened in this country, they were accredited by IBC. But the Carter Center did not come here at the invitation of either of us, either of the parties.
Okay.
And I think we should be able to be quite honest and not start assuming that they were partisan to this group or that group. That to me is crying over spilled milk. It doesn't make sense to me.
All right, Felix, does it make sense to you then?
Well, as I've pointed out very consistently, election observers work under very restricted timelines and very serious limitations. They come 3 days to the elections. I think the largest mission in Kenya was the European Union that had 67 observers. That was the largest. The rest are about 10, 15, 20, 30. Now, that is such a very small number that cannot give an accurate assessment of, on the general elections itself. Secondly, observers observe election day activities. No mission observed the processes after the closing of the poll. Remember, in 2007, the election day itself was as peaceful as it was in 2017. And yet, mayhem and violence occurred in the immediate post-voting phase. And then, as now, the problem was with the result transmission. Recognition is a political, as all these lawyers will tell you, is a political act and a political decision that every country makes. And don't forget, by and large, observers are intergovernmental organizations. They are the same EAC where the incumbents in the sub-region sits. The same with the African Union. Consistently, the African Union and every other observer has given a clean bill of health in elections in Zimbabwe, elections in Rwanda, elections in Uganda, etc., including in 2015, the crisis in Burundi, where President Uhuru Kenyatta, President Jakaya Kikwete, President Yoweri Museveni, President Paul Kagame went to Arusha and said, no, there's no problem with Nkurunziza. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. In the Burundi crisis, both President Uhuru Kenyatta and President Jakaya Kikwete were overruled and outnumbered by the rest, the three of Nkurunziza, Kagame, and Yoweri Museveni. Because in these three countries, they didn't even have term limits. And so don't forget, observation is you scratch my back, I scratch yours.
Yes. Interesting. So we want us to move on now to the next. And I had asked my panel of guests, really, what are some of the lessons that we can learn moving forward? And even as we wait to hear what Raila Odinga's next move will be, I'll start with you, Mutai. What lessons... you are an observer, so it's even better that we have an observer here. What lessons can we learn about our electoral system and the way we conduct our elections? Because 2017 was seemingly going to be, a breakthrough from, a past of, elections that have been questioned, but still it's not. We're still having contentions over the results.
In terms of learning, I will start from my personal views as an observer. One of which goes to the point that when doing democracies, and all democracies in the world did not grow overnight. Ours is just 7 years since we promulgated the new constitution. So I believe we are in the right trajectory. And in terms of electioneering, now that we are moving to the digital or the technology era, it should be a technology whereby it favors everybody. There were instances in the villages where I was doing my observations where the elderly were taken through a lot of other activities for them to get to vote because their biometrics could not be ascertained in the system. Okay. So I think going forward, we should have a system whereby it takes into consideration all this. And I'm saying IBC did their level best because at the end of the day, everybody was able to vote. And now coming to the political face of it, the fact that cannot be overemphasized is the fact that elections are won because of preparedness. And from this election going forward, the role of agents will be relooked at afresh, because anybody who lost or won the election, the problem began with how they handled the agents. And two, elections is not about the material day. Elections is about the all activities going into the elections. Right. How we conducted ourselves says a lot about us achieving a free, fair election and a credible election in that sense.
All right. Felix, what is your assessment of the election and how can we move forward? There have been conversations, maybe we should go the Zanzibar way and, change things. Maybe the president is a person who wins and, the opposition comes in as a deputy president. Other options, should we consider other options of having one president for 7 years, coming in, bringing in another person from another community for, so what is the way forward really?
Well, I have a lot of way forward, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. And hopefully in the fullness of time, I'll write something about the possible reforms that are required between now and 2017. There is, of course, as you've pointed out, a fundamental problem with our presidential system. And in a deeply fractured and divided state as we are, it is probably wise for us to consider other forms of government that can be more inclusive and can be more accommodative, given our fragile and or divided nature. Let me start with election management. I think, and as I've pointed out, by the way, I looked at this election with a lot of confidence, the 2017 election, because I told myself, if President Uhuru Kenyatta won in a free and fair contest, that legitimacy that was denied to him in 2013 would make him take us to the next level of really enjoying the true space and benefits of this constitution. Unfortunately, it was never to be that. And so one is when we talk about, I think there is a fundamental problem with our election management. The closest we've come to a civil war in this country was as a result of the conduct of the then Electoral Commission. And the problem that we are now facing is squarely lies with the conduct of the IEBC. They never conducted these elections, especially results transmission, in a manner that was reflected in the Constitution and the Elections Act. There would have to be fundamental reforms in that. Secondly, on technology. Consistently over a long period of time, we hope that the human error that was characteristic of the previous elections would be cured by technology. But what this election has demonstrated, that technology cannot cure human greed and lust for power. It's as simple as that. And as a friend of mine put it, the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. You feed in computer-generated results, you get a particular results. This election was determined by the results, not from the polling station, but computer-generated results. As a reform issue, we have to go the Ghana way, where technology is used for the purposes of identification to enhance transparency, but the moment we ceded, as this election tells us, results transmission, it make the entire election and voting process that was generally peaceful and transparent very opaque. IEBC knows where they got their results, and as a reform issue, Ghana refused it in 2016, and they identified voters, but then transmission was done manually. There has to be a consideration in that.
All right.
Second, finally, the media. I've said the media in this country has serious legal team, and I want to believe that they will be able to advise the media on Article 34 on freedom of the media and Article 35 on access to information. There is absolutely nothing that stops the media from having and telling their own results. It happened in 2002. President Uhuru made his concession speech based on the results of the media.
All right.
And so I think there are a number of issues that we need to talk, but this election, unfortunately, has taken us to the pre-1997 dispensation. If you see the crackdown on Kenya Human Rights Commission, and I can tell you...
And we'll be coming to that shortly.
More will come.
Oh, yeah, we'll be talking about that in a few minutes.